All right. Hi, guys. Welcome back to the session. I can see just about 9 people on YouTube. Okay, I think the numbers are actually increasing. Drop a message in the chat if you can hear me clearly. Okay. Let me know in the chat if you can hear me clearly. All right. So there's this weird noise coming from my end. I'm trying to. Oh, I see. Okay. 1 minute, please. All right. Sorry about that. I was able to resolve the noise. Yeah, I realized I had multiple channels, connected from my microphone. So I hope you guys can hear me. Let's see the chat. Okay, so very clear. Good. Let's go ahead and just kick off, from where we left off the other time. Right. In today's class, we're going to be covering asynchronous programming. We are going to be talking about various patterns to perform asynchronous actions. Okay, but we're also going to start off by trying to understand what we mean when we say synchronous and asynchronous. Okay, so yes, you know very well we're going to start off with some diagrams, right? So I am going to share my screen and pull up Excalidraw. That is what we use for some of these diagrams. Okay, so let me know immediately you can see my screen. I'm going to share the entire screen here. Share, okay. All right, let's zoom in on this as well. Okay, so I believe you can see my screen. By the way, while you are in this session, if you want to follow through, the material, the class material, I am going to push, some of the items I added today so that you can, of course, clone this while you are in class. Okay. So let's see. Okay, so git add or git commit. I would simply say added the notes on asynchronous or async programming with JavaScript. Okay. That is git push. All right, so let's talk about, and I think I can still hear the music in the background. We need to turn that off. Okay. All right, guys. So let's start off with an assumption, right? You're writing code. Okay, you're writing code. You probably have a function. So you have a function that says print resources or something. Okay, so print resources, and this function accepts some parameters. Okay, and you are going to, when you return this function, you want to return a response like let's just say hello world. Okay, so this is a string. You want to return hello world, but before you return hello world, you also want to perform some actions that is going to probably call a server or call some other method. This is kind of an heavy operation, which means it will take some time. So let's just put an example. We call API server. Let's call that API server. I'm just going to put this as a comment, right? So you call API server to fetch some items. Now, with the way JavaScript works by default, it's going to simply, execute this whole thing, right? It's not going to, pay attention to the fact that, okay, we are expecting some items, to come back here. We need to probably, wait for this to complete, right? At the same time, if you have something that is, very heavy. If you're trying to work with what we call promises, we're going to look at that shortly. If that particular thing is going to block some other actions from taking place because it is synchronous, it would have to wait for that particular thing to complete, right, before it goes ahead to run the other items. Now, by default, JavaScript is synchronous, which means it takes every single item one at a time. It just prints the whole thing, and if there's something that is going to take like 2-3 minutes, that particular action has to complete, right? And this is usually a problem. A lot of people don't seem to understand. Okay, if this is going to complete, why do we then need the asynchronous thing you mentioned? Why don't you just wait, right, for that particular action to complete? Why do we have to implement new patterns, right, when we can just wait? And of course, that's what we're going to be covering, right? That's what we're going to explain in detail, at least so you can understand from different, use cases when to apply these patterns that we're going to look at, okay, in this class. Okay, so now you have your function. You're going to call a different function or a different, service. So let's call this the caller, because that's what it's going to do. So caller is going to call service A, for example. Now this is more like a direct method, right? The only problem is that this particular service A requires like 2 minutes to run. Okay, maybe that's too much. Let's just say 1 minute. Okay, and you want to write your code. You probably want to write your code in such a way that you don't have to wait, right? You want to be able to perform some other things behind the scene. Okay, because caller one is going to execute things like, let's say, print. Let's say we want to return. Okay, let's say we want to print uh 10 names. We want to save 10 names, and right in between we want to check two names. Okay, now we're checking these two names on a different server. Okay, so because we're checking these two names on a different server, it means it is definitely going to take a longer time. When we're printing these names, we're printing on that machine. When we are saving these items to the DB, we have a direct connection, right? So which means this would probably be faster. It depends on your implementation, by the way. But now we're checking a different server. It means we have a dependency. Let's call that a dependency, because we're depending on those results, right? Those results have to come back from this particular server. So if you don't implement a way to allow this happen in the background, then of course it means this is going to block the operation, right? It's going to block the operation, and then we have to wait for 1 minute, to get this information before we continue that process. Okay, and I'm going to show you, like a practical example right now. When you also get to implement that asynchronous, pattern, right, that can make this happen in the background while we are processing some other things. There are still some things to consider, because in some use cases you probably want to wait, right? You want to do some other things and allow this result come back, right, before you choose to stop the execution of that function. Okay, so I'll show you those examples when we look at the class material. Okay, so I just pushed this to GitHub. Feel free to clone it. If you don't have it already, you can just grab it from I think some of you already have this. You can share it in your WhatsApp group, but I just dropped it in the chat as well, so you can go ahead and clone that. Okay, now let's move into the class file here. It is very detailed, right? Which means you can read through and understand, the meaning of asynchronous and the asynchronous programming, right? At least you get a better picture of, how this works. But we are also going to dive into the details when we get to work with Node.js, okay? When we get to use Node.js and talk about Node.js. I mean, we've been using it. We've been using Node to run our, programs, but, what we're simply doing is to execute the JavaScript code, okay? We have not really dived into looking at what Node is. We have not dived into looking at things like the event loop and trying to understand, Node in detail. Okay, so let's just look at some of the few pointers here. When you read some of these materials, please pay attention to the pointers, because we use those bullet points to describe a lot of things, things that we believe you need to know. Okay, things that you should know, at least to make you to give you better understanding of what you're reading. By the way, let me zoom in just in case. I think this is much better. And by the way, if you have questions, please remember you can always drop those questions in the chat. I'm looking at the chat, okay? So synchronous programming refers to the execution of code in a sequential order where one task must finish before the next one will begin. So you see, is an example, right? The way you currently work with JavaScript. So let me go ahead and create a new folder here so we can have some clear separation. I'm going to call this, I don't know, should I call it code 2? Okay, sometimes naming can be very difficult. Okay, let's call this node 2, I don't know, JS files. That's quite weird, but yeah. So let's go ahead and create maybe class 10 because I actually grouped these items, or I will simply call these async. Okay, so I'll say intro to async.js. All right. So you have console.log hello world. By the way, this is a string. Let's make that a string. Console.log mav console.log magic. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's just print this item. If I do cd intro, not that cd intro. Oh, I call that node 2 files. Yeah. Okay. So let's just run that with node intro to async. So now you see we're able to get those items printed out sequentially. Forget about the previous error. Let's run that again. Let's run that again. So you see we have hello world, mav, and magic. Okay, so it's sequential, right? That's basically how JavaScript works. Okay, that is synchronous programming. Okay, so it's I mean that is the default. Okay, so we are executing those items even if it's a function. So let's imagine we have a function that is function. Okay, and this function is maybe return sum, for example. Okay, let's just put param1, param2. Let's do return param1 plus param2. Okay, plus right there. And we also have another function. This function is to print name. Okay, so let's pass in the name, return name. Okay, so now I'm going to call these two functions. I'm going to say return sum. Let's start with that. Okay, and I can simply pass in maybe 1 and 2. All right, and I'm going to simply say console.log so we can get that result returned. Okay, now for the print name, let's do the same thing. Print name, and I'm going to pass in a name, pass in mav. Okay, so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 execution. Right, we're going to run this. So let's run this. So now you see we have, so the first thing that happens here is we get the result for the return sum, which is 3, right? We have mav, which is the print name, just sequentially. This is the first, second, then you have the hello world, mav, and magic, okay? So you see everything is sequential. Now let's take a look at another example, talking about asynchronous programming. Basically, this allows, multiple operations to be executed concurrently without waiting for the previous operation to complete, right? In asynchronous code, tasks are initiated and executed independently, and their results are handled through callbacks or promises. Okay, so we're going to look at those callbacks or promises. This is just an example code. If you are already familiar with writing JavaScript code for web, I'm sure set timeout. You might have used it before, but I mean, it's fine if you haven't used it before. So we have console.log start. This is the first item we are, going to execute, and then we have this set timeout function. Okay, so basically, what this is doing, you see, we have a function in here. What this is doing is giving us, with this callback, we're able to implement a delay, right? So we have a delay. This is a 2 seconds delay, right? And what this would do is you'll see that the execution here would change. Would have start printed out, followed by end before you get this, because of course, it's going to wait for some time. So let's go ahead and execute that again. So this time around, you see we have start, end, and then it gives us a sync operation completed after waiting for 2 seconds, right? And JavaScript did not have to wait because with a callback we have implemented this to say we are actually trying to perform an asynchronous operation. So please proceed to the next item, even if you have a bunch of other items. Let's copy this. Okay, let's bring back our previous code. Okay, and right here I'm going to include this in between. Let's put that right here. Okay, so what you're going to see is we're going to have this result, this result, this result, this result, and then it's going to move on to the next one, and probably before coming back to this. So let's just go ahead and execute this. So you see we have all those items before it gave us a sync operation completed as the last item there. Okay, so I believe this is this makes you understand that foundational concept, right? I have some details about the Node.js event loop I added here, so you can just read up. Okay, basically you can read this up, but we're going to cover this in more detail, right? What this is referring to is that the Node.js event loop is basically a mechanism that allows Node.js to perform non-blocking IO operations despite of being a single threaded engine. Okay, and this would manage the asynchronous operations by executing them in the background and processing their results when they become available. Okay, so the event loop continuously check for tasks. um, yeah, so it continuously checks for the tasks in the event queue and executes them one by one. We are going to look at that event queue. We're going to have diagrams explaining the detail of what an event loop and the event queue actually look like and how it works behind the scene. Okay, let's not dive into that because that is a whole different topic, right? But the point here is the event loop is what is making the asynchronous action actually happen. Okay. um Right. So we have another example. All right. This example, what you're seeing is we're trying to read, some data from a file. Okay. And we also add some description around, being able to perform those actions. You know, and yeah, you can look through this. You can read through the description. Let's just focus on, the callbacks. Let's just dive into, the callbacks. So this is another example, very similar to what we did earlier. By the way, you can ask your questions in the chat once you have any. Okay, so this is very similar to the previous example. What are we trying to do here? Let's look at this function. Okay, so we have a function which is called fetch data, right? It basically has a callback. You see, we have that callback, which means it accepts a callback. Now we just called it a callback as a parameter, but we're also trying to say that this can be used, right, to execute, a different um, action, right? So you see, it's being called as a function. This is how you call a function. So what does this mean? It means we're going to pass in a function, which is the callback. You're passing in that function, and that function, should be able to perform a certain kind of action, right? So let's look at this right now. We call fetch data, right, which is this right here, and then we'll pass in a function, right? This what you're seeing right here is a function. So we'll pass in a function, and that function should be able to print the value, which is the data that was passed in. Okay, that is data fetched successfully. This is going to be printed out, right? So you see we have console.log, and we're printing this out. Okay, so yes, what is going to happen here is by the time we run this code, you're first going to see, start fetching data, right? And then this is going to be fetched after 2 seconds. So let's try this again. Let's try, and this is how you apply that callback, right? You are actually calling the function, right? But based on the we're using set timeout to just okay. So we're using set timeout to mock this scenario, right? Ideally, if you're calling a function or you're calling a service, maybe like a different server, right? You're making an API call. So making an API call. Sometimes you probably don't know how many minutes or seconds this will take, right? Let me use seconds mostly. You don't know how many seconds this will take. So, applying a callback or applying promises is to say you are simply trying to you're trying to have a way to wait. Do you understand? You're trying to have a way to wait. Well, I'm going to show you how you use something we call reject and we call them as, I mean, they are synchronous operations, right? I'm going to show you how they work. I'm trying not to jump too fast. I remember someone mentioned that in the last class I was probably moving too fast and they did not catch every single thing. So which is why you see I'm trying to watch some of the things I say. We'll get to that. Okay, we'll get to that shortly. Let's take it one step at a time. What this callback is trying to do, what we're trying to do with callback is we are simply trying to set the kind of action that can be performed. I mean, this is going to be flexible. It's going to be dynamic. We can basically pass in whatever function we want to pass in here, so long it is able to work with the data that we have passed in within the callback, right? And then we use the set timeout as a way to mock that API call or a database call that would be applied in a real world scenario. Okay, so this is just a mock, right? So when I say mock, it's more like what's the right word for it? It's more like setting an example. This is what this is kind of like how it might happen, right? The delay. Okay, in a real world scenario, you're going to have some delay, maybe minutes, seconds, milliseconds, right? So this is just an example. Take notes. Okay, don't come and say Mr. Mav said that you must use set timeout when creating when working with callbacks or working with asynchronous operations. That is not what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so when I run this, you see we have start fetching data. Okay, so we have end of script. I think that's the right word. Thank you. That is Modesta, right? It's an experiment. Okay, so let's have that at the back of our mind. Thank you. So we have start fetching data, okay, which is what you have right here. We have end of script, which is what we have right here. And then we have the callback, fetched. It says data fetched successfully, right? Because we had to wait. Let's drop this down to a second. Let's see. Let's run this. So you see the same delay. Yeah, I mean, of course, it depends on what actually happens here. If you have more actions taking place, let's assume we have a different. Let's just put in a different one. Or you know what? Let's take this off and let's have a different. Let's have this happen outside, right? So let's have this happen in a different function here. Okay, so this is it. All right, so I have fetch data, and then I'm going to have a different. I'm just going to print. So let's do console.log. Okay, so this should be like 3. Okay, and this is 1. So let's say console.log hello world. Okay, so yeah, we're also going to call this this method, this function. Let's say fetch simple or fetch another data. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this. So we have fetch data first, and then we have this. All right, so we did not pass in any parameter, of course. Let's go ahead and run this. So you see we have hello world printed before data fetch successfully, right? This is just a second. This is 3 seconds. So of course you can simply guess what happened there, right? Pretty straightforward. Yes, we call this first, but of course this guy only has 1 second delay, which means we're expected to see this before it gets to this. Okay, so I hope you get the point. Okay, so let me look at the chat. I think we have a question. What is the main reason for wanting to wait, or when is the async use? We'll get to that. When you say what are the main reasons of wanting to wait, when you make a call to a server and you don't know how long it will take to fetch the result, you want to wait because you need that result. Now there are easier patterns to actually wait. Not you won't be doing that manually by saying I want to wait for 2 seconds or 3 seconds. Okay, there are ways to apply this rule so it would wait and get you that result. If you don't wait, then of course your program is just going to run through and it won't it will just complete that execution without giving you the result you're expecting. So you're going to get like results that probably do not suit your process. That's not what you want, but because your program could not wait, it just executes that way. That is definitely going to be bad. Okay, so this is the output of this example we just tried out. Now we have an example where we work with what we call a promise. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier. We have resolve and reject. Now this is an old pattern, right? An old pattern, but I think it makes sense that you understand how it works. Most people don't use this, right? These days. Okay, so you basically create a promise using the keyword new promise, right? And of course, you have resolve, you have reject. Okay, so what you're seeing here now is that we set our timeout. We're using the same timeout, the same experiment to say, after 2 seconds, go ahead and resolve this, right? If you are working with an API, you say, okay, go ahead and resolve this. If the data was fetched successfully, right, go ahead and resolve this. If there was an error, right, if there was an error, then you can reject that particular data that will be coming back from this. Okay, so you have to programmatically set that. But what you're seeing right now is we're working with set timeout as well, just resolving this, and this is how we make that call, right? We make the call to say fetch the data dot then. So dot then is basically how we we resolve this. So dot then, right, if there's a result after this, just go ahead and print that result. Okay, yeah, so if there's a result, go ahead and print that result. If there's an error, which means if this was rejected, okay, go ahead and also tell us that this was rejected, right? So let's just run this. Let's see what we get from here. Did I save the file? Did I? Let me check. All right, so let's run this again. Okay, yeah, I think that's okay, the same thing. Good. Okay, so start fetching data right here. Okay, that's the first thing we have printed out. And of course, the next thing is console.log end of script. Okay, and yeah, the next thing we have is end of script. And then finally, we have that data fetch successfully. Because of the timeout we're also using here, let's drop that again, or let's just increase it a bit. Let's just do 5 seconds. So yes, you are also going to get the same flow, the start fetching data, end of script, and then after a while it gives us data fetch successfully. Okay, so now we're using the resolve and reject pattern. All right. As I said earlier, this is an old pattern, working with promises. These days you're going to find yourself working with, someone said you typed console.error. Yes, we have different methods when working with console.log, console.error, console.table. Yeah, yeah, okay. So I think that's Gertrude. Yes, you can actually use that. I don't know why you are asking. Is it that, okay, maybe you don't know that you have console.error. If that's what you mean, then yes, you have console.error. Okay, so now this is the second pattern where I mentioned that you can use await instead of working with .then, right? You see we have .then .catch. .catch is going to catch any error. I mean, if you have an error, right? So let's do reject. Let's do 2. Run this again. So after 2 seconds there, okay, let me see, save this. Sorry, I think I'm having a problem here. Give me a minute, please. Hold on. Just give me a minute, real quick. Why? Okay, code. Run that again. Sorry, please hold on. I actually reinstalled the VS Code. I'm having this error. I just realized that I was still using the old instance with bad extensions. I don't know why. Did I remove this? Guys, give me. I'm going to reshare my screen, but just have to give me 1 minute, okay? All right, apologies for that. I'm back, and I hope you can still hear me. Let me share my screen again. So, yeah, sometimes you have such errors with VS Code where it keeps throwing up some errors on the side because you have damaged extensions. Okay, so I actually uninstalled it, but I realized I did not move the new copy to my applications directory. So let me go ahead and share the entire screen again. And of course, I think I really need to change the theme for this new one. So let's change the theme to the dark option. That is what we mostly prefer. All right, so let me know if you can see my screen. Let me also zoom in. Zoom in, zoom in. Is that working? Okay, I don't think that's working as intended. Okay. All right, yeah, it is working. Let's zoom out as well. All right. Okay, okay. All right, so back to what we were discussing. So yes, so let's just show this again. So we have resolve, and I was trying to mention that when you're trying to use dot then and dot catch, dot then is basically going to give you the result, right, based on what you've resolved, right, and then you can also use the reject option. When you use the reject option, then of course you can capture that as well here. So if I say reject, and of course you want to put in that like the value. So when you say reject, you can say okay, sorry, an error occurred, right? An error occurred here. Set the time. I mean, this is just for the experiment. So if you're working in a real stuff in a real project, you can say okay, so if the result was met, for example, let result equals true. So if the result, okay, then you can of course resolve, right? So when you resolve, then you want to put the value. So success, right? So else, right? So else, reject. Then you put, why exactly are you rejecting this? Okay. So error, right? So basically, you can do something like this. Okay. If you don't want to use the set timeout, as a matter of fact, you can push this whole thing into set timeouts, just like this. I hope that makes sense. You already know how to write conditional, so this is not new. Okay, so yes, something like this is how you basically use resolve and reject. So yes, if it's successful, of course you get the dot then. If it fails, you get the error, right? Just to add more clarity on that. Okay, so that was why I had to show that example. Maybe you want me to leave it as well, so let me leave this here. Let me just leave this here. Okay, so yeah, so basically that's how you use dot then and dot catch. But what if we're not trying to move to the modern way of doing things with async, right? So you see we have async. Now we've changed this. We have an async function, and now we decide to I don't know what happened there. So we have an async function, and now we decide to use await. Okay, so async and await. So await is basically performing that role of waiting. Instead of using dot then this time around, we use await. And at the end of the day, we just capture the result because yes, we are going to wait for that particular function to complete execution, right? And then we get the result of that particular operation, right within the variable we've created here. Let's copy this, and you can ask your questions if you have any, right, on this particular example. Maybe I should create a new file so I can leave this. Okay, you know what? I think I can just comment on this. I can paste that here. Okay, so I think this is going to override what I had earlier. So let me just do the right thing. I'll just go ahead and create a new file. So let's create a new file. Let's do intro to async to .js. Now it will be difficult to actually run this intro to async to. Okay, let's paste the new one here. So this is what we use async await, right? This is async. Async is telling us that okay, we want this function to be asynchronous. You see, we also have it here because if you're calling await within that function, then it has to be asynchronous as well, right? So an asynchronous function called fetch data. We are expecting this to return a result after 2 seconds. Okay, and when we are performing that execution, we also have some other code we're running. This is like the first item, we're running that, we're also running this. What you see is that now we are going to basically use await. So let's run this. We have an error. What does it say? Let's see. What does it say exactly? Okay, did I run that file well? It says true. Why? Why do we get true? Why do we get an error? So console.log, blah blah blah. Okay, I think we are having this error because oh yeah, okay. So I think I figure out why. Okay, so the thing here is I would have loved to run this as a regular Node.js file, but no, I am not going to move too fast here. So it's saying cannot find module, blah blah blah, because it expects this to be a module file since we're trying to use async await directly. This is a very popular error that we get, especially when we are not writing common JS code. But that's fine. That's fine. So please do read up, and by the time we get to work with you know uh, uh, module files instead of writing regular, like regular common JS code, would try out an example like this. So basically, this is a new pattern as I mentioned earlier, and it was actually implemented, in a new version, right, of the ECMAScript. That's what we call it as a standard, and it basically allows you to run some of those kind of code, especially when you are running it from within a module, right? I will get to explain more on that when we get to work with Node.js in detail. Now, if I try to do that, most of us will be confused. Most of us that already have some experience writing JavaScript know what I'm talking about. But the point is, instead of using .then, right, .catch, we can simply go ahead and do, await that particular function, okay, and then the returned value, gets into result, okay. And you see now we now applied a try catch. Why are we applying a try catch? Because if there's a failure, right, maybe there's an error from that function or something, you want to be able to catch that function. We already covered try and catch. I mean, obviously you guys are very much aware of what is happening here. If there's an error, we want to be able to catch that error and handle it properly instead of allowing our code to crash. Okay, we want to probably perform some actions within the catch block to say, oh yeah, we caught an error. This is what the error, this is exactly the error we actually caught from your program, and this is what it's saying, right? We can return that to the user or to the programmer to say this is what the error is saying. So go ahead and implement a way to fix it. Okay, someone tries to create an account, for example. So someone tries to create an account and that person already has a record. Okay, so if you're building something practical, someone tries to create an account. So let's call that person user one. User one already exists in our DB. So this is our database, and our database already contains user one, right? And user one comes in again. Instead of trying to sign in, user one goes through the route of sign up, right? When we already have that record, okay, there's a way to identify the record, probably using the email, right? So we already have that record. Now, when user one tries to sign up, he's going to put in, email and password, obviously, email and password, okay? So when this person puts in email and password, it's going to send it, of course, from your front end to your back end. Now, when this code gets to your back end, so let's just assume that we have our back end sitting in between, right? Okay, so we have our backend. Your backend is the one handling your business logic and all those stuff, right? Collecting those data from the front end and doing whatever it wants to do with it. We're going to learn about backend development, so you don't have to be bothered about this, right? And then the backend is going to communicate with the database. It's going to try to save this record in DB. Now, this is the point where you are going to say, okay, we are trying to save this item. I want this to be an asynchronous function called save to DB, for example, right? Or create new record. Let's call that create user record. Okay, we're expecting a username, an email, and a password. Okay, of course, we want to hash that password, but the point is that is what we are expecting. Now, when you're working with this, what you probably want to do is to check. You're going to check if the record already exists, correct? So now that you're going to check, it means you're making a database call and you're going to pass in that email. So let's put a function here that says check if email exists. So we'll pass in the email. Now this is going to be calling a database. You want to wait for the feedback. You want to wait for the response, obviously, right? So because if you're not waiting, then it means it will just run this and it will not be able to capture the results, right? So you can just say const or let. You can say if user exists or if record exists, which is going to be a boolean, right? True or false. And you can simply have equals await. So the point now is if record exists based on the business, based on the logic you've put inside this function, right? I mean, you would also write this function to fetch that record from your DB with all the select queries and all that. If you don't know what that is, we'll get to that in the future, okay? So you want to be able to now check if that record exists. So the result you get back from here most likely will be a true or a false. If the record exists, true. If it doesn't exist, false, right? So now you're going to check and say, okay, if this, because you're going to have either true or false. So if it's true, do this. Probably you want to say return to the user and tell the user, this record already exists in our system, right? Okay. And if the record does not exist, so else. So this is the point where you go ahead and, of course, call your database. So create a new record in the DB. Okay. So you call your create record in the database. Okay, so now, of course, I know I wrote this code on Excalibur. Some of you might be asking, why didn't you just write this code on VS Code? So let's try to do that. Let's see if I can easily paste from Excalibur when it comes to the text. Oh, okay, I think we could do that. Of course, I think I forgot the function. Yeah, okay, so yes, I don't know where that 0 came from. Let's try to format this. Yes. Okay, so this is exactly the function I wrote there. So if you look at this right now, you see what we are waiting for. Okay. So what we are waiting for, if I should mock this as well, just as an experiment, I would say check if email exists, right? And we're expecting the email itself. That's what we're passing in. So this is exactly good. This is going to call the database, right? So you can have an example of a code that might say, select all from DB, where email equals this email that we passed in. Okay, now let's forget about this. The point is this is going to have some delay, right? That is going to have some delay. So what I'm going to do, hold on, I'll bring back that code shortly. Okay, so what I'm going to do, so this is our code. What I'm simply going to do is to extract some code from here, which is the timeout. Okay, now we can go ahead and I don't want to write that manually again. So let's just put in some delay here. So this is going to take 5 seconds to check, right? And I would simply probably return, true. All right, let's just return a true, for example. Okay, so this is what's happening here. I have a set timeout. We're going to wait for a while, and then this is going to return a true. Okay, we can also return the entire thing just like this. But yeah, I mean, the point is we are simply going to return a true here, if that is resolved. Okay, so but if we're using the resolve thing, just remember, if we're using the resolve thing, then it means we also have to implement that callback strategy. But it's okay, the point I'm trying to make here is that we have a delay, and at the end we're going to return a true or a false, right? We don't know how long this will take, right? We don't know how long this will take before we get that return value, if it's true or false. Okay, but we have implemented this to say I'll wait for this particular function, right? Because we need this function. We don't want to just rush through the entire code base, because by the time it gets here, it doesn't know what it's checking. It's checking for something that is undefined. Okay, that's the error you begin to get. It's checking for something that is undefined. We don't have a specific value attached to if record exists as a variable. Okay, so we did not get it true, we did not get a false. So at the end of the day, this becomes undefined if we don't await, right? If we don't await, this becomes undefined. So for that person that asked the question, why do we have to wait? This is an example, right? We have to wait to get that specific record. And the point of having a try, That is very crucial as well. Having a try and having a catch. Okay. So let's see. Did I close that properly? Nope, I did not. So take that guy, put it in here. Okay. So the point of having a try and a catch, so if there's an error, is because we want to be able to, let's format. Yeah. So it's because we want to be able to check, and when we're making that check, if an error actually happened here for some weird reasons, we have an error, and that error probably says uh, invalid email format. Of course, you should have checked this properly. Okay, but let's just assume we have an error, which means we throw that error, right? If you throw an error, of course, I believe you should know by now that once you perform a throw operation here, then it means we're not getting to the return value. That's why you see it is grayed out. Okay, so when we throw, it means there's an error, and when this error actually occurs here, it's going to stop the execution here, and it's going to basically return what you have in the catch block. Okay, so if you just have something like return error, maybe not message or just error, now this is going to return that specific error. So what we've done here is we're able to await, right? We're able to wait for this to actually check, and after checking we get that result. Okay, so this is the new pattern we work with when we use async await, and it's the modern style of working with asynchronous patterns in JavaScript. Okay, so that's what we have right here. Now you can of course try out this example in your own time, right? When you have your free time, you can check it out. But let's dive into looking at some additional details when it comes to asynchronous programming. So now I created two files here. The more on async is just to give you more examples and also explain some of those details even better, right? Give you some terms like what promises is all about. Okay, so promises provide a cleaner and more structured way to handle asynchronous operations compared to callbacks, right? A promise represents the eventual completion or failure of an asynchronous operation, okay, success or failure. And it allows chaining multiple asynchronous operations together. Yes, you don't want to do those kind of chaining, having multiple, callbacks or what it's trying to say here is that you can actually have something like, for some reasons, maybe that's the way you worked on your code. You can actually have, multiple, hello function, right? You have the then, okay, you have your execution in here. Now, this is not something I would, recommend that you do. Okay, but yeah, is it possible? Yes, it is possible. It's possible to have, multiple chaining here. I don't recommend you do that. Instead, you can always wait for, the result, pass that result to the next one, just like that. If you have heard of the term method chaining, I think you should also read that up, method chaining. So when writing code, the fact that some things are possible doesn't mean you should do them, right? Try to keep your code as clean as possible. When we start working on core backend code base, I would introduce you to most of those patterns, like the one I just mentioned called method chaining. We would experiment with most of these things. Trust me, I'm sure you would enjoy those backend sessions a lot, right? So we're getting there gradually. Yeah, we're getting there gradually. So take your time, take your time to read through the material here more on async JS, right? Yeah, I mean, it's just referencing the same thing, but it gives you more detailed when it comes to the explanations, right? Speaking of error handling, we try and catch. We just experimented with that. But yeah, I mean, I hope you get a better picture of what this is. So if you have heard of asynchronous programming or error handling and you feel it's a big deal, trust me, it's not really that big of a deal. Looking at the way we've described this, I hope you're able to understand this better. If you have any questions, please go ahead and drop your questions in the chat so that I can take your questions already. Okay. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop your questions in the chat. All right, drop your questions in the chat. Is anybody confused about this example I gave? Because I don't want to leave people confused in my classes. Okay, this is a very simple example to check. Just to explain, why we are using that await. Right. If you're confused about this example, ask your question here. Okay. And also, when you are writing your code, please, this is something I've always mentioned, even when you were doing HTML and CSS. I mentioned commenting, right? It's actually important that you comment. Comment on specific operations that you believe you want to drop some comments on to make it clearer, or you can actually try to even describe the function itself. Okay, so you see, I have a parameter email, and I say, okay, this is going to probably return a boolean, right? And it's going to return true or false. So you can capture that in here. So it's going to return a true or false. So we can capture some of those things here, returning a boolean. And then you can add some explanations as well. So this method checks if an email already exists in our database records. Okay, so now this is not very necessary, right? Don't just write random comments, but if you feel that your function actually needs to get to you need to describe your function better, for the developers that will be working on this after, after you're no longer working on that function. Then this is a good way to describe your functions or your methods. But try as much as possible to also write, clean and clear methods. Okay, methods that probably do a single thing, or functions that do a single thing, right? Instead of having functions that do a lot of things and then you need to do a lot of explanations. Okay, so you said all of the async you mentioned. Which one is the latest? Async awaits, right? Which is what we used here. Async awaits. Okay, so yeah, async awaits. So that's what we actually used here. So please, that is what. Let's take this off. Also, we don't really have any real thing happening here. This was just an example, right? So we don't really have like any real thing happening here. Do we have any other questions? It's already 8:56, and yes, we have covered this topic. We'll dive into more details, more context in the future when we learn backend development. Uh, okay, so I don't think we have any questions coming in. Please go ahead and take your attendance form. Do well to ask your questions on Discord or on the WhatsApp group if you have any. Do have a wonderful evening, guys. I'll see you in the next class, which is, of course, tomorrow. Okay, so have fun.